Good afternoon, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive Series. I'm Jim Brooks, Provost Emeritus of SMU, and I'm here today with Dr. Tom Martin, who was Dean of the School of Engineering at SMU at a critical time in both the history of the school and the history of the university. Subsequently, Tom spent a number of years as president of the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Tom, welcome back to the campus. We're delighted to. Good. You were dean of the School of Engineering here from about, what, 1965?
65 to 74.
Right. And you came here through a what I would describe as a less than traditional search process.
Yes.
And I will let you elaborate on that because it's an interesting story in and of itself.
Well, I think like all good stories, it really started long before I showed up on the scene. And the key figures that were Eric Johnson, Cecil Green, and Gene McDermott, which is familiar figures of faces in Dallas. At any rate, they were concerned about the lack of research developing in the Dallas area. They looked over at Highway 128 around MIT and Silicon Valley out by Stanford, and they said, why can't that happen here? Well, the basic feeling was that there wasn't a significant, or what they called a critical mass of technical people here. So they thought that if they could invest in the development of a research institute or something of that sort, they could create that effect.
And they were at that time really driving Texas Instruments.
Oh, they were really driving, and Texas Instruments at that time was really just becoming a major corporation. They had just gone into solid-state electronics. Well, anyway, they set up the Graduate Research Center of the Southwest, which I know you remember.
Yes,
very well. And it was eventually that was offered to SMU, and
actually it was headquartered on the campus for a while.
Began here, that's right. And for reasons I don't understand because I wasn't here, they got at loggerheads with SMU, moved it off the campus, and separated it entirely. At that point, or about that point, they brought in a very famous scientist, Lloyd Berkner, who was the father of the International Geophysical Year, probably the best known scientist in the U.S. at the time, and installed him as president. He was president of Brookhaven National Laboratories. Well, Berkner saw the problem from a slightly different prism than everybody else. He saw it through the Brookhaven model, which was housed very large pieces of research equipment that no one university could afford, and put them in a central location where people from all over the country could come and use it. Well, that makes all kinds of sense for high energy physics. It doesn't make sense in electrical or mechanical engineering
or mathematics or science.
Or math or science. So anyway, Berkner also, for reasons we need not go into, but got at cross purposes with the academic community in the Southwest. And his vision for the research center, which became the Southwest Center for Advanced Studies, never really materialized. And SCAS, as we called it, never quite grew. It was becoming an increasing financial burden on the Texas Instruments trio, Green, McDermott, and Johnson. And so they cast about for another possible solution to the problem they saw, which was the lack of integration of the technological business community and the academic community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Because there was a great deal of research potential in the business community.
Oh yes, with
industrial.
TI and Collins and Bell Labs,
Bell
Helicopter, General Dynamics.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot here. And so they contacted Dr. Fred Terman, who was well known as the father of Silicon Valley. Fred had been the head of electrical engineering at Stanford, then dean, and eventually provost. And Hewlett-Packard, the Varian brothers, and many others got their start through Fred. And he was legitimately known as the father of Silicon Valley. Who better, to bring
Of course.
and pick his brains? So they did. They brought him in.
And by the way, let me interrupt and say that Fred and Wally Sterling, who was the president with whom he worked, built Stanford from a good regional university to an eminent international university.
That's right. And he knew how to do it.
That's right. Excuse me, Tom, but go ahead.
That's true. And I'm a Stanford alum myself. So, well, anyway, at that time, I was the dean of engineering at the University of Florida, and I was doing some things that had attracted a lot of attention nationally by putting in a television system using some new tariffs that had been approved for the telephone companies to reach Cape Canaveral and the Martin Aircraft Company in Orlando, General Electric in Daytona Beach, and various others in that whole north central Florida area. And it caught Johnson's eye, and one day he and Green and McDermott and Mark Shepard, who was then president of TI, hopped in a TI plane and came over to Gainesville to visit with me. And we visited, and I showed him the TV system, which was up and running, and everybody was happy as clams about it because graduate education was now available where it had never been before, and our faculty was being exposed to the real world. And next thing you knew, Terman was over there. And I had known Terman in years past. And he had
From your days at Stanford,
days
really.
at Stanford. He had really mentored me through my career. He came over and told me, you've got to go to Dallas. He said, that's where you got to go. And you know Fred as well as I do, and you know that once he's made up his mind, you might as well do it.
He's not easily dissuaded.
So I ended up here.
He's sort of the Bill Purcells of the operation.
Bill Parcells occupies in football very much the position that Fred Terman occupied in higher education. He was really a genius. Well, anyway, he did a lot of the groundwork for me before I got here, of course. But at this point, I think the president, the incumbent president, Willis Tate, had made up his mind that he was going to work with the Texas trio no matter what. He was going to make it work because so much had gone wrong before. So I think he had to swallow hard at a few things I did, but he did, and he helped me, and I can't fault him for lack of support. But we did some things that could not have been done on any other campus at that time. And it really revolved around the three things that the whole TI group wanted to achieve. They wanted to achieve national recognition for SMU. That was essential to Mark Shepard because he was a SMU alum.
Yes.
They wanted to penetrate the town gown syndrome, which was very much in evidence, not just between SMU.
Yeah, the interface was not open.
It was not open. It's what we call impedance matching in engineering. And that was a hard nut to crack, by the way. And then the achievement of recognized excellence. Now, how do you recognize excellence? I mean, you can wrap yourself in the robe, but it's not like a heavyweight fighter who has to go out and knock somebody out. There's got to be a reason why people think you are a top institution. As luck would have it, at that time, I think it was the National Science Foundation, I'm sure you remember it, was a publication called Correlates of Quality. And what they did was to poll all of the engineering department and science, department heads and deans and presidents, I guess, and faculty members that they could reach, as to what the best departments were in the United States. And they lumped them down into various categories. And then they said, okay, now take this top category, the really elite institutions, what properties do they share in common that are measurable? And they found there was such things as the number of PhDs produced per faculty member, number of master's students handled, the number of baccalaureate degrees graduated each year by a department. For example, a department graduating less than 30 bachelor's degrees simply couldn't achieve elite status.
That's right.
And the amount of dollars in research that the faculty member was able to generate each year, things of that sort. So we then adopted the TI practice of what they called objectives, strategies, and tactics, where they did their long-range planning. And we followed that model. But of course, to follow the model, you had to have quantitative objectives. So the correlates of quality became our quantitative objectives. It was clear that the existing faculty, with a few exceptions, would never achieve those goals. So I had to recruit basically
A new faculty.
And they had to be people who bought into the idea, because the idea of faculty being held up to numerical goals is not something most faculty members buy.
Well, that's true, and certainly, and still don't in many parts of the university.
That's right. And so I recruited with that objective in mind, and I recruited a bunch of hard-driving young Turks who thought they were good enough that they could not only do that, they could beat it. And by God, they did. In a few years, it was amazing.
Well, you had a powerhouse faculty.
It really was. And they made names for themselves elsewhere, too. People like Sage and Melsa had published a number of books, 7 or 8, I think. And Sage is on the National Academy, and Melsa was head of the department at Notre Dame. But there are others that went on to equally auspicious positions. And then the thing that was really high in the category of things that the Greens wanted done was to pierce this town-gown interface. And so they felt that the TV system was clearly a way they could do it, because that could bring the professional community and the faculty together. The second was to have a frequent communication with our alumni to build up the size of our freshman class, which was far too small to sustain the school. And so we put out a publication called Pony Express, and each issue had some newsworthy item, but we always included a tip on recruiting students. And we put it in a three-ring notebook so we could keep them on file. We asked them to do so, and we took one member of our faculty or staff and had him visit periodically with them to pump them up, and that helped. We were also concerned about national visibility, because what good was it if, sure, we were good, but nobody knew about it. So we started publishing an annual report that was different than any kind of annual report ever done before, or I think since. First off, we published our progress towards the correlates of quality. And sometimes they were pretty sorry, but we published them anyway. We told the truth. And eventually they got pretty darn good. But also, each time we featured an in-depth article on some controversial subject in education. It might be an organizational question, might be a budgeting problem, it might be something like student evaluation of faculty, or even administrative evaluation of faculty. So we pursued those and published them on a regular basis, and they became sort of an event that people looked forward to. We sent them to all the foundations, to all of the major corporations, to all the deans, many presidents, and we got a lot of compliments back on them. People like the Harvard Business School wrote back and asked for something like 20 copies to use for a seminar they were having on educational administration. So it did a lot for the school.
Of course, raised your profile, our profile.
Yeah, and it was pride the faculty could see the progress they were making. And also the officers at foundations began to take notice of us. And the faculty really began to get noticed nationally. And of course, they were publishing and being asked to be speakers around the country. And of course, the TV system by that time was growing. And as I was telling you before we came on the camera, early on in the program, but we had something like 1,200 engineering students from SMU out there in TV land. Yeah. And
largely in the industrial plants.
In the plants, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, we had 95%, we offered 95% of the TAGR, that's the Association for Graduate Education and Research that managed the TV. We had 95% of the courses and 95% of the enrollment. Nobody else was using it. And that did a whole lot for us. In the meantime, Mark Shepard in particular, but also Green and McDermott and Johnson were out beating the business boardrooms to get top-notch people to serve as an advisory board to me, to again penetrate the interface at the very top
Right.
of the corporations. And it wasn't long before we had one of the most powerful boards in the country. I mean, it
the
equaled
board
any
for you, the Foundation for Science and Engineering
Yeah.
Board, right?
and
And Mark Shepard was president or
Mark
chairman.
Mark was president. Terman was, I think, consultant. But we had people like, Mark, of course. We had the second guy from Collins Radio because Arthur Collins was too shy to do it. We have the number 2 guy from General Dynamics, the number 2 guy from Bell Helicopter. We had Harding Lawrence from Braniff Airways. And so it went. We got
Yeah.
the top guy from they were out in Carrollton. I want to say 3M, but that's not it. Anyway, it was
Yeah.
we had everybody, and some of the local big guns like C.A. Tatum from
Who
the
was-
utility company,
Right, who was chairman of DP&L at that
Yeah.
time, Dallas
and then
Power and
the
Light.
head of the gas company.
Yeah,
Uh,
Lone Star Gas.
Yeah, and so they met once a month, for a board of that power. I mean, that.
And some of those people were engineers too.
Oh,
They were
yeah,
engineering.
quite a
CA
few.
was an engineering alum of
Yes, he
SMU,
was.
as a matter of fact.
And Mark Shepard.
And Mark was too, of
Yeah.
course.
And Mark was also Eric's and Cecil's and Gene's boy,
Yes.
and they were not going to let him fail. And so they saw to it that he had the best board that we could possibly have, and we did. And of course, having Terman there was a great help also.
Of course.
So those were some of the things that we got going, and it all began to come together, and the school began to get the recognition it deserves. And all the time, Eric was there pushing away. And at that time, the Dallas-Fort Worth, then called Regional Airport, had just started construction. And that had been a huge undertaking by the mayor of Fort Worth and the mayor of Dallas, who at that time was
Eric Johnson.
Yeah. And they had managed to get the two cities together and to create a board where they had people from both cities. For reasons and things that I do not know, there was unhappiness with one of the Dallas board members. And he dropped off the board. And Eric pushed me on. I wasn't
You weren't.
I weren't really popularly elected, let's put it that way.
Well, and you probably weren't looking for one more thing to do either.
No. But anyway, I ended up on the airport board at the time of its construction, and not soon thereafter was chairman of the construction committee. So I was involved in what was obviously to everyone connected with it going to be an economic engine that would drive this
Of
whole
course.
community.
Of course.
And it was essential, and I had not recognized it at the time, but it was essential that SMU, and especially the College of Engineering, be a part of that engine. So that was a big move too.
Yes, it was. And you were telling me when we chatted the other day about the opening of the airport and the
Oh, yeah.
transportation system.
Yeah, that was a hard call. The airport was about to open. I think it was, I don't remember the date, it was in 74, in January, as I recall. And it was a nationwide, in fact, it was an international event. They flew the Concorde over from
Yes.
France, and first flight to the U.S., as I recall, and took the board up in it, by the way. But anyway, about a week or 10 days before the airport was to open, they had this people mover called AirTrans, and it was being built by LTV, also one of our really strong supporters. And Jim Lang had been a very
Yes.
good supporter. But it had fallen terribly behind schedule, and although LTV was promising they would have it up and running, Eric was queasy about it and asked me if I would go out as a consultant to the board and study the thing and see what I thought. And I took one of our bright young computer science professors because the problem was apparently in the computer program.
Mm-hmm.
They were not human operators on those cars.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that much about computers. Well, we went out and spent several days touring the airport and riding AirTrans and talking to the designers. And we both came back with a conviction. No way that thing was going to work properly. Very likely they get it up, and halfway through the ceremony, one of those trains would stall, and the whole thing would jam up, with 500,000 people out there.
Yes.
Right in front of the whole world. So that was one of the most difficult reports I ever had to write. But I did, and I told Eric that he would have to have a backup bus system. 'Cause I didn't see what else we could do.
Of course.
You could hire in all the experts you wanted, but there wasn't any way I could see them getting that fixed. And he bought it and got the bus system, and we had the opening on schedule, and nothing went wrong. So.
And the buses worked.
And the buses worked, yeah. But it was a real disappointment because we had all touted that people mover as, that was state of the art. It was a whole new idea that we were calling it a horizontal elevator.
Yes, I remember.
It was going to be you got all this little car and punched a button and it took you to your terminal. Well, it never worked like that.
No, and my impression is that it's being replaced now with
yes, it is.
A newer system that presumably will have to be debugged also,
Yeah.
that being the nature of such animals. Well, let's talk a little bit about Terman and his philosophy, because you signaled early on, and I'd known from way back how important he was as a guiding force for you and for, actually, as it turned out, ultimately for SMU.
Well, he was a great guy. He was dean of engineering when I went to Stanford. And I got to Stanford by a quirk of fate. The two outstanding double E schools at the time were the University of Illinois, where Dean Everett held sway, and Stanford, where Dean Terman was. Both were editors of book sequences, and Everett was the editor of the first book I ever wrote, and of two that followed after that. Anyway, my wife got pleurisy. I was in upstate New York at the time, and the doctor advised that it would be ill-advised to take her to Illinois. So when the offer came from Stanford of a fellowship, I took that. I went to Stanford. And that was my first contact with Terman. He took quite an interest in me and guided me at every stage of my career. When I was first offered the chairmanship of a department at the University of Arizona, he called me up and asked me to come over to Palo Alto and spend a couple of days with him, and he'd teach me how. And I did. And when I was offered the deanship at Arizona, he asked me to come over to Stanford. Again, I did. And after that, he kept in contact with me all the time. Terman strongly believed in several things. One was this impedance matching concept. You had to build a community of professionals
That mutually reinforced.
that mutually reinforced each other. He believed strongly in what he called steeples of excellence. He used an analogy. He said, if you want to win a track meet, you don't get 7 guys who can each jump 1 foot. You get 1 guy who can jump 7 feet. And he said most universities fill their faculty up with 1 foot jumpers. He said you need 7 footers. And he made the analogy to a rubber membrane. He said if you take a thin sheet of rubber and stretch it across something like a wooden hoop and pull it tight, and then you take a wooden dowel and push up from the bottom, you create a steeple. The interesting thing about that steeple is it pulls up the whole membrane. He said the same thing happens in academics. You get one really strong person, and it pulls up the quality of everybody around them. The closer they are to them, the more they get pulled up. He said, but there's still this area out here where the 1 foot jumpers are. So you bring in another steeple of excellence, and you try to get it fairly close to the first one. And pretty soon you get 5 or 6, and you can build a whole college around 5 or 6 steeples. He said, that's the way to go. Pay what you have to pay, do what you have to do, but get your steeples. And then make sure they talk to the people outside.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you and I have talked, and I think through you, I came to know Fred reasonably well. By that time, I was provost, and he consulted with me in terms of steeples of excellence for the university, and we set about a program evaluation and elimination. I think we eliminated 14 or 15 programs in order to be able to support the potential steeples. And I found him a source of real strength and help and guidance, like you.
Well, he had just a wealth of experience, too. He had been an advisor to the state boards in many states. I know he did the whole state system for New Jersey and New York, and there were others as well. He headed a team that was asked to go by the State Department to South Korea to design a wholly new institution. And I was lucky enough to be invited to serve on that team. And we designed a type of university, a research type of university that had never existed. And Asian universities do not have outreach.
No,
And
they're insular.
they're terribly insular. And that whole idea was new to them. But they bought it lock, stock, and barrel from Fred and built it.
That's
And
interesting.
it's there now and going strong.
Well, you also, as one of your major issues, you really put in quantitative measures of excellence, and that gets back to another Texas Instruments rooted concept of objective strategies and tactics.
Yes. Well, yeah, and that brings up another point. And I know this raised a lot of eyebrows at the university, and it had never been done anywhere. And that's what we call the grid. In order to measure our progress, we had to have quantitative measures. Most of those measures were in research. But in engineering, faculty members don't do research on a departmental orientation. They don't do electrical engineering research. They do research in electronics, thin films, or phosphors, or something like that, but some field within it. It's what we call the engineering sciences. Sciences that make basic science practical. So the way most universities, or all universities are organized on departments. And departments have control of courses, they control the curriculum, they control the hiring, they control tenure.
That's right.
They control just about everything. And the result is that they tend to stultify and to build walls around themselves. And I wanted to open that up. And if you take the engineering sciences, which is the way accreditation is divided also, there are about 6 of them. And we divided the College of Engineering up into these engineering sciences, and we assigned faculty based on their research to one of these centers of engineering science. And then we formed standing committees which organized the curricula by selecting the courses from the centers. But we could abolish a curriculum just by abolishing the committee.
Yeah.
But the centers stood all the time. Everybody said it wouldn't work because faculty were working for two bosses. But it was true anyway, because in research, you're responding to the sponsor, and in teaching, you're responding to the needs of the students. You've always had two bosses.
Well, and it enabled you to be flexible and to maximize the impact of the resources you had.
Yes.
You weren't locked into a pattern in which spending might not be efficiently carried out.
Yeah, a good case in point would be something like civil engineering. At the typical state university with civil engineering, they've got, they have structures, of course, but then they'll have sanitary engineering as part of it. They'll have hydrology as part of it. There's no way with our little bitty civil engineering department that we could offer a full civil engineering program at SMU. And we normally don't get the typical civil engineering student anyway. They go to A&M and places like that. They get them by the droves, and they go to work for the highway department and
Sure.
the city engineer and people like that. The students that come to MIT have very high aspirations. If they're interested in civil engineering, they want to work for one of the structural design firms,
Of course.
in some architectural firm, something like that. So we emphasize structures, and we were able to do that. But you couldn't do that at A&M
Yeah.
or some other place like
In
that.
a traditional
In a
pattern.
traditional pattern. So it opened up a lot of things for us, and we were able to move into fields like solid-state electronics and computer electronics faster than most other schools in the country. We were right there on the front line, because all we had to do was form a committee.
Yes, and maximize the resources
Yeah.
that you had, or at least identify new resources that you needed to recruit. That
Right.
gave you that flexibility. Let's talk a little bit about the evaluation aspect, the operations, the objective strategies and tactics. You use that very effectively. In fact, I think I first heard about it, and subsequently people may know it as GOST, Goals, Objectives, Strategies, and Tactics. And you use that also in all kinds of evaluations.
Yeah, we use it in faculty evaluation.
Yes.
And that got me into one problem, because based on my evaluation of one faculty member on those criteria, he wasn't good in. And so one year where everybody got a salary raise, not everybody, but most everybody, I gave him a salary decrease. I figured if you could get an increase, you could get a decrease. Bad performance warranted one thing, good performance another one. He took me to court.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I won. But
Well, change is not always easy.
no, it isn't. And when I walked into my new job at IIT, I walked right into 2 lawsuits for the faculty discrimination. The school was accused of discriminating against a female faculty member because she didn't get tenure. And then the following year, a young man in the same department came up for tenure, and he didn't get it either, and he sued for reverse discrimination. He didn't get it because they didn't dare give it to him when they hadn't given it to her. So it's a hard road to walk. But the one thing about objective standards, the wonderful thing about it, is that you've got the facts and the truth on your side.
Yeah, and that doesn't change.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And you can point to other places to use it. You take a place like MIT, which I think is one of the most successful universities in the world, and their faculty members are almost entrepreneurs by themselves. They have to sell themselves to various sponsors, and in effect, they they sell 20 hours a week here, 10 hours here,
Mhm.
and they sell this to MIT. Some of it's teaching and some of it's research.
Sure.
And pretty soon, next thing you know, they're running their own company too. And it's because they operate the same way. They're very objective in what they have to do.
And that's a style that the university accepts, so that it isn't there recognized as an anomaly,
No.
as it would be in many places.
Ah,
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Tager television network, because the primary tower sits about 2 blocks east of where we're videotaping right now.
yeah, that's right. There was a considerable controversy over that. President Tate, and I agreed with him, he didn't want that unsightly thing on
Yeah, because it's not a small tower.
No, it's not exactly an architectural triumph either. But the thing had gone too far too fast for us to back off, because when the FCC approved our license, they approved a specific location. I mean, that's longitude, latitude
Yes.
here, and you couldn't move it from there. And Earl Cullum, who was one of our great supporters, gentleman here, had gotten
An engineer, an electronics engineer here in
Yes.
town.
and he had gotten the license for us. So we couldn't move that thing 5 inches. And so it went up, and I shared Willis's dismay, but what could
Well,
we
it
do?
had to be tall enough to reach the new Southwest Center campus in Richardson, the Texas Instruments facilities in South Richardson, and Greenville. Or was that on some kind of a relay system?
Greenville was on a relay.
Yeah.
No, we went to the one at SCAS when, as the network finally matured, and the other schools bought in name, although not much in substance. We had to get the network to TCU and to UD
Yeah.
and Arlington. They really were not interested.
And ultimately to Bishop College.
And to Bishop College, yeah. But anyway, the system had to go there, and in order to do there and to reach as far as we did, we had to have a relay point at Southwestern Med and another one, I believe, at the med school, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then that could get to Arlington.
Yes.
And from there to...
Right.
I've been so wrapped up in other things since then.
Yeah.
Forgotten some of the details.
Well, that's right. And some of us...
And that was a pioneering effort too, because the TV that we did in Florida was with the telephone company, and it was a point-to-point system. We went to branch campuses, and the students still had to come sit in a classroom on campus. Here, for really the first time, a large number of students were assembled in a virtual classroom, one that didn't really exist except in TV land.
Yeah.
And it was widely copied throughout the U.S., Stanford being one of them. Stanford came over here and spent days and days over here looking at the Tager system, and eventually built a network out there that was hugely successful too.
And as I recall the way it worked, you had actually, in some cases, industrial appointments on your faculty appointments.
Yeah, again,
Visiting industrial professors and...
Yeah, we call them VIPs, visiting industrial professors. And obviously, SMU had a small faculty because it was a small institution. And we had to do a whole lot more than what they were able to offer. The conventional notion of an adjunct professor, where they were paid some pitiful little sum of money and taught at night, I just felt wasn't appropriate. So we wanted people who could direct doctoral dissertations, supervise master's theses, teach graduate courses, undergraduate if they wanted to, and be full-fledged, even voting members of the faculty. Well, that raised more than a few eyebrows, even on my own faculty, put them on as voting members, And a lot of the faculty in the sciences here did not like the idea of them supervising dissertations. But fortunately, the administration and and the graduate school went along with it. They gave us the authority to do it, and we had one of the outstanding faculties in the country. We had National Medal of Honor winners,
Yeah.
Jack Kilby, inventor of the integrated circuit, and people like that. And when people would look through our catalog and see who we had on the faculty, we got graduate students that we would never otherwise have gotten.
Of course, and were we doing it actively now, we have 4 Nobel Prize winners sitting at the medical school that would have been available for people in that sector of interest too.
Exactly.
And so it was a new idea then. I think it's more widely accepted now because you all were the groundbreakers.
Well, it was a different world. When World War II ended, there was this great surge of electronics research that had been done largely at Harvard and MIT during the war. A whole bunch of academics had been collected there. And a lot of this material was declassified. And Terman headed up the radio research lab at Harvard, and he correctly anticipated that post-World War II, that the government was going to be a big spender in research and engineering in the universities. And so when he went back to Stanford, that was what he was going to do. And there were so many guys already at MIT that just floated out and started their own businesses. That's why 128 became what it was. And so there was this flood of new technology. Most of the engineering faculty the country over were obsolete. I went to Stanford on work on my PhD, which I got in '51. The word computer was never mentioned. It had been invented just 3 years earlier.
Yes. Yeah.
The word transistor had scarcely hit the press, and it had come out just, in 51, I think
51, I think.
Shockley.
Yeah.
So I ended up with a PhD, and I was obsolete the day I walked out of the place. And we were determined that was not going to happen. And that's why we went to this VIP route.
Well, there was such a stable of talent in particularly the electronics community in the greater Dallas area that you had resources that would have been the envy of any university.
Well, yes, and they would make their research facilities available to us as long as it wasn't classified work.
Yeah.
So a student could go out there and have multi-million-dollar facilities that we could never provide.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so it was a wonderful experience for them.
And as I recall, the way it worked, where there was a pool of students, say for example in Greenville, they'd set aside a room that was the classroom. And then there was talkback between faculty members here, if that's where they were, and there. And so there was a dialogue. The only thing that was missing was immediate proximity.
Yeah, we called it talkback television.
Yeah.
From the beginning. We started that at Florida. And we found that without the talkback, there wasn't a whole lot of it. But the fact that it was available made all the difference in the world. And there were all kinds of experiments done, particularly at Stanford, but also in the Seattle area on talkback television. And they found that the performance of the student at the remote classroom was every bit as good statistically as the student in the classroom.
And I know some of my colleagues, I'm not sure, I don't remember whether any of the engineering faculty, I know some of the statistics and mathematics faculties actually found that periodically they wanted to go to the plant and have a face-to-face session with them so that was available. So there was a lot of flexibility in the system.
And practically all the faculty did that at one time or another.
Yeah.
Of course, then the internet came along, and that's going to eventually do away with educational television of the sort we've been using. May have done it already. MIT has put its whole catalog on the internet. Now, they won't give you credit for the courses you take, but the material is there.
Yeah, so it's accessible.
It's accessible, but the certification they're holding back, they want the money.
Well, now, as I recall, by the way all of this was worked out, as you and our friends at TI were establishing all of this, you essentially had the responsibility and the autonomy to appoint your own faculty, to set your own degree criteria, and to monitor your faculty and be responsible for the quality of the product.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to the uniqueness of treating the problem as a professional problem rather than as a town and gown problem. I had come from a university, Florida, where we'd had an immense amount of difficulty with the graduate school approving faculty, even though they were right out of eminent universities, teaching, but not on the Florida campus. And it was actually a factor in what caused me to eventually leave. And SMU was willing to give the Dean of Engineering the authority to manage his own graduate program. And that did not exist in many places in the country.
That's right.
At the time, it was very rare. And the graduate requirements tended to be very appropriate for physics, chemistry, geology, fields of that sort, but were quite inappropriate in many ways to engineering. And one of the cases I can cite is TI had a plant in Austin, and they had one here in Dallas. Well, you have employees who take courses at SMU, and then they get transferred to Austin, but Austin would only accept 3 courses toward a master's. And they come from Austin up here, and we'd only accept 3. And I said, that's nonsense. And the dean down there was a good friend. We'd worked on many projects together, and I called him up and I said, Johnny, this is the nut house. Why don't you award the degree if you offer more courses
in the
to
student's curriculum? Yeah.
And I'll give him a degree if we offer more. He said, that sounds reasonable, we'll do it. So we did it. Never could have been done. And he had to go through the Board of
Regents
finally to get it. And he had a hell of a time doing it. So it was a pretty one-sided road for a while. But.
Well, the flexibility is a luxury and a necessity, really. The downside of it is that it puts a lot more responsibility on the dean and the administration of the school, because all of a sudden you're a surrogate for the university standards, yes. And it puts a heavy burden on you.
Yeah.
But it improves the capability in situations like you were dealing with here to do a quality product in a unique and path-breaking way.
And if it does, and it goes back to the correlates of quality. They could trust me because the goals, they could see whether or not I had the interest of the university.
They could measure your performance.
They could measure me, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an interesting chapter. I want to touch on one or two other things. You came here at a time there were 6 or 7 deans of schools that you dealt with on varying degrees of activity, but certainly probably on a weekly basis. I know in my day, I think it was a weekly basis. There was the Council of Deans. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether you have at the top of your head the impressions of some of your decanal colleagues, but I thought that was the most interesting group of people that I'd ever worked with.
They were all different.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, there were some real... Well, I remember it was the Southern Association, I think.
Yes.
They came in and characterized SMU. So they appropriately picked the Mustangs as a mascot because the colleges are run by a bunch of Mustang deans.
Racehorse deans.
Yeah.
That was Larry Chalmers, who was at that time president of the Florida State University.
Yeah.
Subsequently moved to San Antonio he moved to Chicago as the head of the Chicago Art Institute, and then to San Antonio. And I saw him long afterwards, and he still remembered writing that. Yeah. But it was true. You all, and this was Willis's style in many ways, he believed in, I think, in trying to identify and hire good people, and then give them enough latitude that they could really be effective. And he was criticized in some quarters for this, notably the Southern Association, which, as I told you in an earlier conversation, a little later on, I got the university in real trouble because I balked at all of the Mickey Mouse regulations that the SACS had, and we were without accreditation for a few years.
But you know, you look at what that policy brought, forgetting the engineering for a moment, it kicked the business school out of its lethargy,
Yeah,
brought it alive. The Meadows School has certainly gone like
that's right.
crazy. I can't speak to the seminary, but it's my impression that it's done extremely well too.
It's done very, very well. The law school.
Mm-hmm. So, we talked about Stanford earlier, and I may be touching sensitive material here, but Stanford really built itself not by building a great core of the university and then spreading out into the professional schools. It built strong professional schools on the Terman model, and that pulled the center of the university.
Yes.
My impression when I came here was that the core of the university was the whole reason for being. And Terman was trying to get SMU to follow the
Stanford model. Yeah.
The other model he typified as the TCU model. And he thought that we would be forever doomed if we didn't break out of that. And you have to give President Tate credit, I think, for doing that. By whatever method he used, he really sort of kick-started the whole process.
Well, he really did, and you know, and that process worked. And this is, as things usually are, was an artifice of the timing of people and organizations, because when I became provost, it was very clear that the College of Arts and Sciences, Humanities and Sciences, of which I had been dean, was surrounded by steeples, or growing steeples at least, and I was determined that we were going to grow some, not necessarily the whole college, because you couldn't do that all at once unless you had a Rockefeller that dumped $100 million on you or something. And so, for example, in two areas, and this may have happened when, some of it did happen when you were here. We moved a chair that had been vacated by retirement out of the Department of Mathematics, which was then pretty close to being moribund, and into the Department of Statistics in order to recruit a faculty member who subsequently pulled everything up, making the exact point that you made earlier, that is the Terman point of steeples of excellence.
Well, you know, there's another sort of related point to that too. Each of the professional schools has a professional constituency.
That's right.
Liberal arts does not have a corresponding constituency in the outer community, not even in the sciences, really.
No.
So the opportunities for this merging of community didn't exist, really, except in the professional schools.
That's right.
So it's not a surprising development.
Well, one of the things, and I don't know to whom the credit should go, but partially in an attempt, I think, to counteract your exact point, the Master of Liberal Arts was created for people who came out of all kinds of different backgrounds to come. They wanted renewal as they had time and money to indulge themselves, and that grew a base
that was
of support.
A wildly successful program.
It was very successful, and it provided a base of support in the community that the professional schools have built in, so to speak.
You know, a name that hasn't come up, and it should, is Neil McFarland.
Yes.
He was provost during the time that I was here.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
That's right.
And I know Neil had to swallow hard a number of the things that I was doing, but he was sure a great help to me.
Well,
he was a very nice person, but a very sensible one who could see the positives and balance them off against other things.
Yeah, Neil. I agree with you, and I worked with him, and I probably ended up doing some of the administrative things that I did because of Neil. But he was, and despite the fact that during part of that time he had a very ill wife and he carried on magnificently, I thought.
He was really the one person I always felt I could go to and talk to.
Yes.
Willis was my boss.
Yes.
You can't talk to your faculty.
No.
The other deans were competitors. But I could talk to Neil.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was done in the Council of Deans, and this was, I think, started by Neil, maybe by Bill Ayers, who preceded Neil, was the use of the Council of Deans to review rank and tenure promotions from across the university. And my feeling was, when I became provost, that most of the rank and tenure recommendations had fundamentally passed through a faculty sieve. I wanted them to pass through an administrative sieve because deans of necessity see things differently, and they're looking, and it's good for the deans to look at other schools and see what's going on there. And it was an arduous task, which you will no doubt remember. But I thought that was one of the good things that came along, and it was really Neil who started it, I think.
Well, he was a key figure of that period.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. And as a chief academic officer, he had to accept a lot of things that were counter to the conventional wisdom.
Well, that's right, because not only were exciting things going on in engineering, but the School of Business was coming along. And of course, the School of the Arts had been born somewhat earlier, but it was in the process. It was like a big loaf of bread with a chunk of yeast in the middle. It was growing in all directions, and with some really striking people. Lloyd Fouch, you may remember Lloyd in the choral area, and a number of other people. Bob Anderson, world-renowned organist. So the university, that was a decade, the 60s and early 70s, late 60s, mid-60s to mid-70s, was really a decade of, I think, of remarkable growth. And the School of Engineering really, thanks to you, played a key role. And the School of Engineering has continued the momentum that you gave it.
Well, I'd like to take a little credit for one more thing. My Dean of Engineering up at Illinois Institute of Technology was Andre Vacru.
Oh, sure.
And I was instrumental in getting Andre down here. I hated to lose him because it's much harder to recruit to the south side of Chicago than it is to the SMU campus. But Andre was a true academic, but he was an entrepreneurial academic.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things we had done at IIT with branch campuses, he brought here and started the campus up in Plano or Richardson, or
the north area,
and continued a lot of the other things. The school grew, and he took good advantage of the National Technological University, which SMU again was an integral part. IIT was the first member, SMU was the second.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, Vacru came here as dean. About when?
Golly, let me think. It would have been around 80.
Mid-'80s?
Mid-'80s,
yeah. Because it seems to me he followed Bob Fossum, maybe.
Yes.
That's right, because it was Willenbrock. After you, it was Willenbrock, and then Bob Fossum, and then I think Andre. So, well, Tom, we're approaching the end of our chat together. Is there anything else that we need to cover from your perspective?
No, as I have told you, or as I told you yesterday when we had lunch, I have a very warm spot for SMU. My son is an alumnus of the law school and in liberal arts. And I was given an opportunity as dean here to do things that would not have been possible on any other campus in the United States of America. and it was done not in a grudging way either. And I was given the opportunity to be mentored by the outstanding educator of my time,
Yeah.
Fred Turman. So I look back on it as sort of the best years of my life.
Well, you brought a lot to the university because the importance of the Texas Instruments trio, and we both recognize that, and they would too, were they alive, for whatever reasons, fault need not be assigned, opportunities were lost, but you captured an opportunity and captured their interest in building the school, and it certainly, it paved the way for other things, and I think you talk about the impedance problem between town and gown. I think in a very real way what you did began to break that down and improve that, and that improvement is still with us, and that's very important.
Well, you know, it was a touchy time. A really key guy at TI, we haven't even mentioned it, it was Pat Haggerty.
Pat Haggerty and the OST system.
Yeah, and that, and he's Catholic, and he was supporting the University of Dallas. Yeah. And had SMU lost TI when Haggerty became chairman, it could have lost.
Yes, yeah.
When he became chairman. But for Mark Shepard, and I think Mark held it. And then, and I will say, Haggerty, you talked about OST, it's funny how things come around and around. Haggerty was brought in by the Prime Minister of Taiwan for council. They set up a plant there, and he told him about how they used OST. The Prime Minister was so excited about this, he wanted to do this for Taiwan. So he said, "Come and teach me how to do it." And so Pat said, he got about 10 people. He got me for education. So we went over and we redesigned Taiwan.
Well, on that note, Tom, we'll sign off, and let me say again, in behalf of the university, we appreciate all you've done over the years, and it's a delight to have you back on campus and to have a video conversation with you that will be for posterity.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. I enjoy it, even if you had to give me a map to find my way around.
No.